Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. Mindy Mandell here. So today what I want to talk about is, what is Platonic philosophy and how do you practice this? How do you do Platonism? So there are a lot of questions, and in fact, I reached out to the community to find what are your questions, and I got a bunch of questions, some very thoughtful ones, so I thank you for that. And I'm going to try to address them all here. So first, let's start by talking about what Platonic philosophy is. So of course, if you study Plato in university, there are a number of different theories you're going to learn. You learn about the virtues, you learn about the theory of recollection, the ideas. There are a number of different directions that the dialogues go. But if I had to just narrow it down and say, what is one sentence that captures all of it? I would say that Platonic philosophy is about the search for the self. The Delphic oracle's maxim to know thyself is really what guides us through all of this. Now, to know the self, of course, requires knowing the whole of which we're a part and the conditions for this whole to be. And so this is why we do study metaphysics as well. But what you'll find, especially when you're looking at what is the spiritual Platonism versus the more academic, logic-focused Platonism, is that I'm on the spiritual side, of course, and we feel that it is not enough just to be able to talk about it or to be able to cite the dialogues. There are many people who are very educated in the sense of knowing the dialogues well and being able to discuss them with an air of confidence and knowledge. But the spiritual Platonists will say that that is not enough. We have to have some direct experience, and we have to understand that experience. Now, it is a special kind of experience, and I'll talk a little more about what kind of experience it is, but some kind of direct experience, a spiritual experience. And we have to understand it, because what we'll find is that wisdom is a state of mind. Having information is not the same as being wise. What this means for us, then, is that philosophy is a way of life. And our studies point us to the conclusion, then, that what we are is incorporeal. We're not these bodies. The physical realm, as we learn in our metaphysics, our physical realm has a mode of reality, but it is not ultimate reality. And this is something that maybe we can understand on a conceptual level, but what does it really mean that we're not these bodies, that the lives that we're living have some degree of falseness or incompleteness to them, that it's not ultimate reality? And many different systems come at this in very different ways. We treat this realm as though it really matters and it's important, and yet there's a kind of paradox there. Other systems will say that, no, this is really just all a dream. It's all an illusion. We need to escape. To be wise is to escape. We say there's something to that, but not quite the way we would approach it. And so there's a lot to figure out to understand what it means for this not to be real. And so this is actually a big part of why it has to be our experience, and it has to be our state of mind. We have to be able to see this world and to relate to it for what it truly is. And that takes more than just a conceptual insight. We have to know ourselves as incorporeal. It's not enough just to read about it. So our studies can give us right opinion, perhaps even some degree of understanding. But we do need some direct experience to know, because what we truly are is never born and it never dies. It is not the body. Many systems talk of us being, of our essence being energy or a frequency. And this is a very useful way of talking. So I'm going to adapt that for a little while here, because what we need to do is purify and unify this energy that is our essence. Now, of course, the ultimate insight into the one itself, or I might call it the one self, and in the future I'll make a video on why we might want to change our translation from one itself, which is the common translation, to the one self. But I'll save that for another discussion. But anyway, the insight into that highest, that first principle, will take us even beyond this notion of being energy. But for our purposes now, the energy imagery will serve us very well. So I'm going to stick with that. There is a basic principle in metaphysics that power is commensurate with unity. Now, this video is not going to be heavy on metaphysics, but for those of you who would like to go more into this idea, I would encourage you to take a look at Proclus's Elements of Theology, particularly Propositions 61 and 62, that focuses on this idea. So in addition to studying the writings of this tradition, we want to engage in practices that are going to purify our energy and will unify it. What we'll find is that by doing this, then we are able to bring greater power. We're able to participate in those higher realms. Where you have greater unity, you have greater power. And where you have greater unity, you're also closer to the one. And so that means that being closer to the one means you're participating in higher realms. And we have to raise our energy in order to do that. When we are when we're very distracted, when we're not unified, we're broken into many different factions, chasing this idea here and this idea there. We're one way with our family and another way with our coworkers and so on. Often we compartmentalize our spiritual practice. We're one way when we're doing Platonism and we're talking to people who are interested in this, and we act a completely different way when we're in the outer world, where there are people who think that this is all very nutty, and so we mold ourselves into what they would be more comfortable with. And so in these ways, we break our energy up. We're not only turning our attention in many different places, but we're also then diluting our energy. So we need to unify, we need to purify. And that's a great deal of what our practice is about. And many of the questions, by the way, that some of you asked me dealt with the very practices of Platonism. So let me jump into that. For those of us who see Platonism as a spiritual path, it has a very theurgic vein to it. Everything we do is theurgic. And what I mean by this is that everything is for the purpose of unifying and purifying our souls, our energy. All of these practices that I'm about to talk about are rooted in the recognition that learning is recollection. Now, there was the question, did Plato teach any specific rituals at his academy? This really is the million-dollar question, because the short answer is we just don't know. However, there is evidence of awareness of energy movements. One thing I can point to of that would be the myths in the dialogues Timaeus and also the Phaedo. If you are familiar with the yogic systems of the chakras and the energy movements of those chakras, then within those chakras, I should say, the energy movements within those chakras, then you will recognize parallels in those two myths. It seems too much of a coincidence that Plato touched on things that perfectly match the yogic system and yet has no connection at all. I think that is just too much of a coincidence. Another thing I would point to is a play that was written by a contemporary of Socrates named Aristophanes. Now, he was not a fan of Socrates. In fact, he mocked him. And he wrote a dialogue called The Clouds, which mocked Socrates. And by the way, just as a footnote here, Plato got his revenge by using Aristophanes as a character in the Symposium. And he gave Aristophanes a story which Socrates knocked down in one sentence. And then he also gave the guy hiccups. So I think that's his revenge on Aristophanes. But anyway, Aristophanes clearly was not a fan of Socrates, and we find this in the clouds where he is mocking Socrates. But ironically, we can turn to this very dialogue or this very play to see the way he presented Socrates was somebody who was doing like yogic poses and things like that. And I used an excerpt from the clouds in a book I wrote a few years back called Discovering the Beauty of Wisdom. Um, I'm not here to push the book. If you are interested, though, it is a book introducing how to do Platonism, and there are links in the description box below. But you don't need the book for what I'm going to talk about here. I used an excerpt in the book, and I'm going to read that excerpt to you now so that you can get a sense of the way Socrates was presented in this dialogue. And it reads, "The door opens, revealing the interior of the thoughtory, in which the disciples of Socrates are seen in various postures of meditation and study. They are pale and emaciated creatures." And we've got here a teacher named Strepsiades and his disciple. And Strepsiades says, "Ah, by Heracles, what country are those animals from?" "Why, what are you astonished at?" his disciple asks. "What do you think they resemble?" "The captives of Pylos. But why do they look so fixedly on the ground?" His disciple says, "They are seeking for what is below the ground." "Ah, they're looking for onions. Do not give yourself so much trouble. I know where there are some fine big ones. But what are those fellows doing, bent all double?" "Oh, they are sounding the abysses of Tartarus." "And what are their arses looking at in the heavens?" "They are studying astronomy on their own account." And so there you see it's a comedy and it has some humorous aspects to it. But we see there that these people are doing some sort of poses like if you're familiar with yoga, maybe you've learned a pose called downward dog where you're looking down but your butt is up in the air. It sounds like they're doing something like that. And so apparently this was something that Socrates was known for. This was not, he wouldn't have made that up if Socrates always just walked around the marketplace talking to people the way Plato presented him, then that scene wouldn't have made any sense. But you can't mock somebody unless you're mocking what they actually do, right? That would be the way to mock them. And so that points to there being some sort of energy movement awareness. Of course, also throughout the dialogues, there are references to things like wrestling and archery and the other various sports that they did, which also, could be seen as there could be forms of them which are energy movement focused. So we don't know exactly what they did at the academy, but clearly there was some interest. I think you can make at least a strong argument. I shouldn't say clearly. It is still controversial, but there is some evidence of awareness of them being aware of energy movement and doing something to that effect. Now, we can borrow from the various systems that we know of. We don't know, of course, what they did at the academy or if there was anything there. But we do know yoga. We can do Tai Chi, Qigong, other various systems like this. And so we can borrow from those systems. Now, that does not mean that we have to then study their systems and the way that they, in terms of their philosophy or the way they teach why these movements work. We can adopt the movements and put it into a Platonic framework. We can also use meditation in the same way. And so you can borrow meditation from Zen, you can borrow it from Vipassana, and there are various, techniques out there, and you can find the one that fits you best, that you find is most effective for you, and you can adopt that. And again, bringing it into a Platonic framework. Closer to our hearts, perhaps, are things like contemplation. Now, that's not to say that these other things that I talked about, like yoga or meditation, are not significant. I personally find them invaluable. I think that they are absolutely invaluable complements to the things we do that are more in line with what we would call Platonism. But contemplation is really in our wheelhouse. And this is where we carry a question, for example, like when you're working on these dialogues, there are a lot of puzzles in them. And rather than just compartmentalizing our reading where we read at some point and then we close the book and don't think about it again until the next time, we want to carry that puzzle. If something was confusing, don't just grab onto the first answer that comes. Carry the puzzle. Have the courage to not know and to just hold on to that confusion and that feeling of discomfort that comes with not knowing. So carry that puzzle around. Let it, I like to say it incubates in your soul because it's getting to that point where it's ready to pop out and into a full-blown insight. So it's incubating. We can also carry a question like, what am I? Or what is the self? Or what is the one? Or what is the good? Or why would the one and the good be considered the same or two names for the same thing, two sides of the same coin? What is the relationship between the one and the good? These kinds of questions we can carry, not just as a mantra, but again, letting it incubate in the soul. Because these are all ways that we awaken that recollection that is the wisdom that we already know, right? Again, that idea that learning is recollection, that our souls already know it. It's only our ignorance of our earthly life that blocks us from remembering this wisdom. We want to bring it out. And so theurgy is a way of bringing that out. Now, of course, a big bulk of what we do is our reading. And you may ask yourself, is theurgy something in addition to reading? And I would say no. Even reading is done theurgically, which means that we read differently than the way that we read as students in school. As students in school, we're taught to read, I would say, with our brains. We're reading objectively. We want to master the dialogues. We have this idea that if I read it once or twice and I'm a clever person, I should be able to figure out what's going on, and now I can talk about it, and now I know that dialogue. We say no, that's not what it means to know the dialogue. That gives you right opinion, some understanding of the dialogue, but that's not what it means to know it. In order to know it, you have to really read with the soul. And that means that we are reading as a method of growth. We're reading as a way to awaken our recollection. In Platonism, we use the mind to transcend the mind. And this is a phrase that confuses many people. Now, in other systems, they often say that you think too much, stop thinking, don't think. And if you're drawn to Platonism, you're probably a person who is very suspicious of anyone who tells you not to think. It sounds like they're trying to trick you. And it sounds like they don't want you to bring along that part of you that has benefited you so much in other areas of your life. What we do in this system is we say, you know what, logic is a very useful tool, and being intelligent is a very useful tool. And the discursive mind is a very useful tool. It is not the height. And this goes back to the idea that this physical world has a mode of reality, but it is not ultimate reality. Our discursive mind, it has a mode of reality. It is a useful tool, but it is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal has to go beyond the discursive mind. And so we use logic and reasoning in a theurgic way in order to build our energy, to unify our energy so that we can actually transcend the discursive mind and tap into nous or divine mind. And that is our goal. Okay, so we're using the mind as a tool. This trips a lot of people up. It's kind of a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it's a very valuable tool, and yet it's easy to get hung up on it and to not let it go. And so that's where it can be a challenge. And I think that's why in other systems they say it's just too much of a burden to try to bring this tool along. But I would say that it's too much of a burden to leave it behind. You can't leave it behind. But what we do want to do is leave our baggage at the door when we're reading. And that means that we want to put our stories aside, put our assumptions aside. We don't want to connect dots with our own assumptions. When we're curious, when something is puzzling to us, when it doesn't quite make sense, there's a tendency to want to connect the dots with your own assumptions about what it probably means. We want to avoid that. Hold on to our questions. And those, again, are the kind of puzzles that we're going to carry with us in our contemplations away from the text. But when we're reading, we want to leave all of our assumptions at the door and try to read just what is on the page. We want to take time also as we're reading to pause periodically, turn the ideas inward, and really reflect on what we read. Reflect with the whole soul, not just seeing it logically, but do we feel it? Do we really recognize what is going on here? And seeing it as clearly as we can. And the more we work with these dialogues, the more we're able to do this. And I think you'll find that Platonists, spiritual Platonists, don't read the dialogues just once or twice. We're going to be doing this our whole lifetimes. We go back over again and again and again. And each time we bring a different state of mind with us. And therefore, we're able to get more out of it. Now, in addition to these sorts of things that we're doing, all of these theurgic practices, we can also, and we need to, explore our own false beliefs. What we're going to find is that the higher we go, I can think of it as more profound or higher either way, but like the higher we go, the deeper the blocks we're going to surface. What we're going to find is that each time we go through this, I was saying before that each time you read it, you come to it with a different state of mind. And a big part of the reason for that is because we are clearing away all of our assumptions, all of our conventional ways of thinking, all of our family's garbage, really. It's all starting to clear away. And each time something clears away, it means we're able to appreciate and rise to a higher state of mind. We're more purified, and therefore, that power, that whole idea that power is commensurate with unity. As we clear things away, we become more unified. Our energy is stronger. We're able to participate in higher realms and higher energies, higher frequencies, if you will. And so each time we read the dialogue, we're seeing more. But what we also find is that as we go higher, and as we become more unified in our participating in those higher energies, it means that whatever is blocking us, we're going to hit a new level of blocks. And those blocks then are going to surface, and we're going to find that instead of it being very smooth and easy, to just, oh, now we're getting better at this, now we're seeing more clearly. No, what's going to happen is we're going to find ourselves really irritated some days, or very frustrated, or very restless, or getting annoyed with the text. We're going to feel really triggered. And this is very natural. It may feel like a step back. Why am I angrier now? Like I thought that reading and purifying and being wiser means that I'm going to get rid of all of my anger or so on. It actually might bring it out. And I want you to know that if that is happening to you, and there was one person mentioned that in the questions, how do you deal with anger? This is actually a very natural thing. And so you need to be aware of it and recognize that the more you work with your own assumptions, with your own false beliefs, your own self-images that are limiting, you're going to find that that anger then is gradually going to clear away. And so there are some things that you can do to really facilitate this process rather than just kind of haphazardly hoping it happens on its own. You can actually, if you're aware of these patterns, you can learn these patterns more clearly so that you recognize when you're being triggered and which trigger it is. And all this ties back to this experience with mom and dad, or this belief from my family. And you can find a more systematic way of dealing with it, and then you can deal with it more effectively. So let me take a moment to talk about that. So one thing that I think is across the board, every spiritual system recognizes is keeping a journal. A journal can help you keep track of your insights, but it can also help you keep track of the blocks that you hit so that you can start to see the patterns. You want to see what triggered you. So you want to find why this anger seemed to burst out of nowhere. What was I doing just before I got angry? What happened that triggered me? So you need to see that kind of thing. And you need to see the patterns of if there's like a critical voice in your head that keeps yelling at you, there's probably a pattern to it. And so you want to find that pattern. You want to be able to tie it to your childhood. Now, I've done many videos on a system to work with these called philosophical midwifery, which is a form of philosophical counseling that my teacher, Dr. Pierre Grimes, invented and really perfected. And so there are a number of videos on that. There is a playlist on it. In fact, I'll link it here. And I definitely encourage all of you to check out those videos if you haven't already, if you're not already doing midwifery. And what you'll find is that it's a very systematic way of looking at these blocks, these states of mind, whether it's a restlessness that stops you, or you find yourself just wanting to close the book and do something else, or you get a headache, or you're very tired all of a sudden, or there's bursts of anger, or whatever it is. These are all various ways that our limiting self-images get in our way. We self-sabotage in all these various ways. In addition to seeing how we're blocked when we're actually reading or meditating or so on, we find that we can also get great clues from our dreams and from our daydreams. And I do have videos on that as well. It's in the same playlist, Philosophical Midwifery. It all goes together. So looking at our dreams, we'll find that our dreams are that wiser part of us, that wiser mind is showing us what it is that we've been overlooking. And so learning how to navigate your dreams, we don't just look at the surface story, but the states of mind underneath it. The stories on the surface may seem very silly sometimes, but there's always something quite profound, even with the silliest of dreams. There's always something quite profound in the states of mind, and it's really an amazing thing to I've done many midwifery talks as we call it the pregnant party, the person who is blocked and is trying to have an insight. We're the pregnant party. It's called philosophical midwifery, based on, he took that name from the Theaetetus, where Socrates compares himself to his mother, who was a midwife. And in a similar way, in philosophical midwifery, there's a midwife who is midwifing youth to see a block, to have an insight into what is blocking you. And so we talk about the midwife and the pregnant party. And I've been the pregnant party many times, going through many of my dreams. And it's really incredible, just amazing to see the intelligence of our dreams. So just from a curiosity perspective, it's worth trying. But definitely it's very, very beneficial. Of course, it helps to remember your dreams, and it can be very hard to do that. And I think you'll find, though, that if you make an effort to remember your dreams, initially you may only have some vague wisps of memory or just a very short scene. But if you are persistent, always writing it down in your journal, no matter how little it is, no matter how illogical it is, if you keep writing it down and making the effort to remember, you'll find yourself remembering whole dreams. It won't take that long. It will eventually happen. Daydreams, in a sense, are a little bit easier to work with because you are awake during them. And there's a sense in which you're not awake, but because you're off somewhere else. And then when you snap out of it, that's kind of an awakening, right? Boom, oh yeah, I'm not that person. And what you find in that moment of, oh yeah, when you pop out of your daydream, is the awareness that there is a self-image at the root of the daydream that is not you. And that is key to understanding your daydreams, because there's some reason that self-image is appealing to you. And that's what makes your daydreams appealing. It makes them so enticing and hard to drop. Many people find daydreams to be one of the hardest things to drop. I still will go off into a daydream now and then. But I've gotten to the point where when I do that, I will immediately, as soon as I recognize myself in a daydream, I'll pop out of it and say, okay, wait, what image is this? And actually, the daydreams that come up tend to have a pattern. So I've already seen that. I'm like, it's that one again. Okay, now I'm going into that one. And now I see that image. And so we become much more adept at pulling ourselves out of them. And that also helps us then keep that clarity of mind, that one pointed focus. I should have said before that another benefit of carrying a question or carrying a puzzle is that it keeps us from daydreaming. That's one of the great benefits of it. In addition to of its actual benefit of the work that we're doing, it's not so it's different from just a mantra. Part of what I guess a mantra has its own benefit on our energy, and I'm not going to speak to that because that's not really part of our system. But if you're interested in mantra, I'm sure you can find videos in various Hindu systems that to deal with mantra that can probably explain it more intelligently than I can. They do have benefit in their own right. Many people, though, use mantra as a way to try to avoid thinking about other things, to keep their mind focused. And certainly carrying a question, carrying a mantra, carrying a puzzle can have that effect. Carrying the question and the puzzle, I think that has the effect of really incubating the question within us and pulling out that recollection. Perhaps mantra does the same as well on an energy level. I'm not knowledgeable about that. But all of these methods also have the side benefit of keeping us focused on things that are more meaningful than our daydreams. Our daydreams are only meaningful in that they point us to what is blocking us. And so in that sense, they're meaningful, but to get caught up in a daydream is a waste of time. If you have any further questions about midwifery or about working with dreams or daydreams, please put that in the comment section below. There were many questions about the gods as well. Of course, Platonism was not birthed in a vacuum. There was a rich pagan culture in which the system arose, and so we have this history that we can work with. There are the Chaldean oracles, there are the Orphic poems, you've got the writings of Homer and Hesiod, and there's also the Eleusinian mysteries, which were quite popular back in Plato's day. And all of these are rich sources of Greek mythology and stories about the gods. And so the question is, how do we use these stories, or should we even use these stories? I can tell you from my own experience that starting off, I was initially not that interested in the gods. And that's because I came at it from a very logical perspective, and the gods seemed a little bit too woo-woo for me. And also, in learning metaphysics initially, I really just wanted to get like the big framework. I'm the kind of person who needs to see the big picture first. I need to see the framework before any of the details would make any sense to me. I have to know where they fit in order for it to even make sense. Not everybody is like that. I used to think everybody was, but I've come to learn that that's not true. There are some people who want to see the functioning of the gods and then worry about where do they fit. And so where the gods will fit in for you, how mythology will fit in for you when it becomes meaningful will kind of depend, I think, on which personality type you are. If you're the kind who needs to see their functioning right away, maybe mythology is going to appeal to you right from the start. If, on the other hand, you're the framework kind of person who wants to see the metaphysical landscape first, and then think about how the gods interact with one another, then you may want to put off dealing with mythology more seriously. But that said, I do find that I have a fan blowing. If you're wondering why I keep touching my face, the fan's blowing my hair in my mouth. I do find that the further I go along, now that I am concerned about seeing more clearly the functioning of the gods, I do find mythology more attractive. What you'll find is that how do I say this? The gods, there's a sense in which the gods are absolutely real. They are divine functions. And as divine functions, they are absolutely real. And yet, when you're reading mythological stories, what you're reading are characters in a story. And these characters then are depictions of these divine functions. Each time you have a different function, you have a different god. And so to see the gods interacting with one another means you're seeing how these divine functions interact with one another. So the stories then allow us to see divine functions interacting. Some common examples are things like a marriage, for example, is a union of energies at the same level. Or siblings are energies that function at the same level, whereas when you're dealing with parents and children, you're dealing with different realms, the hierarchy of realms. One example that I have used in the past is Uranus and Kronos. They're both intellectual fathers of intelligible realms. And the intelligible, it transcends our physical world. It is a whole. And so it is represented, to represent this idea of it being transcendent and a whole. Both of these gods have been castrated and banished. And obviously, being castrated and banished sounds like a really bad thing, but actually, it represents something very positive because they are both transcendent over our physical realm and they are realms that are wholes. Zeus, on the other hand, he's also an intellectual god, but he is the father of our physical realm. Now, as the son of Kronos, then he's the one, of course, in the story, he's the one who castrated and banished his father. Kronos, in turn, castrated and banished his father, Uranus. But Zeus, being the father of our physical realm, he then oversees this world of differentiation. Now, he has both a transcendent and an immanent aspect. As transcendent, he oversees the physical world from his throne on Mount Olympus. But we also see his immanent aspect in that he's very much enmeshed in this physical world. And of course, he's planted his seed far and wide. He's the father of many demigods. And so you see the difference in their functioning by the way their characters, or the way these, I'm sorry, I should say it more clearly here. We see the difference in the way these divine functions function by seeing how their counterparts, their characters in the stories function with one another. So when we read these stories, for those of you who are interested in mythology, when we read these stories, we always want to look for the metaphysical meaning in them. And again, for those of you who are not so interested in mythology, maybe at this point you're not at a place where it's really significant to you. And so it probably, as you go deeper into Platonism, you'll find the stories becoming more meaningful. Now, as for rituals tied to these gods, we could borrow, of course, from many of the various mystery schools. That is a personal preference, and that is another way, then, of practicing theurgy. Again, it's really just a matter of what appeals to you, what speaks to you, what works for you, what helps you get in touch with that deepest part of yourself, that part of your soul where recollection is, or where knowledge is ready to surface and be recollected. So if it helps you to feel closer to the divine and more focused, then absolutely you should include these rituals. Again, if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. But you can find other means of theurgy to really get yourself in touch with that deeper wisdom that is in your soul. You can also, of course, create your own rituals. You don't have to do only ancient rituals. There's no rule that says that the ancient rituals are better than the one you made up yesterday or you'll make up tomorrow. Whatever works for you. I often recommend having a special place where you do your reading, and that can be kind of your sacred space, and it puts you in a certain state of mind. And again, it's a theurgic state of mind. Now, you may want to light candles or incense if that appeals to you, or not, is fine. But having a special place or a special time where you meditate, where you contemplate, where you read, I think helps to bring us into that solemn state of mind that we want to be in. Now, many people learned the virtues as the heart of Platonism, and yet, curiously perhaps, I haven't really said all that much about them yet. They do play an important role in all that we're doing and everything that I've discussed up to this point. It is in the state of mind that we're aiming to cultivate that we will find the virtues playing out. They are states of mind. Now, in the Dialogue Republic, the virtues are presented as habits in the soul. This is our preliminary purification before diving into metaphysical contemplations. But what we'll find is that as our soul blossoms, as it matures and ripens, if you will, then we'll find that the virtues also are maturing, and they are then, there's this play where the more we mature, the more we're able to mature the virtues, and the more we mature the virtues, the more we're able to advance our soul. And so they kind of play off each other, and it's a very curious dynamic that takes place. And then you'll find that the fullest flowering of the virtues really describes the state of mind of one who knows thyself and has learned to function in the world with this insight, because it's not that easy to function. The more, as you start to have the experiences, as this becomes your state of mind of one who knows him or herself as divine light, rather than as this body or as the persona that you have come to identify with up to now. As you learn to function in the world and drop the ego, it changes your state of mind. And as you have those experiences, you find yourself making adjustments and trying to figure out really how to function in the world. It's not as easy. I don't know if it sounds easy or not, but maybe it seems like, oh, once you've reached that place, you are by definition wise, therefore you know what to do. It actually does require a lot of growth. I would compare it, and Dr. Grimes often compared it to the ox herding pictures in Zen. In Zen, there is a series of pictures. For those of you not familiar with it, you can find this online. You can look up the Zen ox herding pictures, just like it sounds, herding oxen, except there's only one ox in this story. But there are 10 pictures that take you through from where a person is when they maybe are first starting out, or that conventional mindset, all the way through to the Zen master would be the 10th picture. And what you'll find is that that first awakening experience, what they call Kensho, is actually only the 3rd picture. I'm not going to go into those because that's part of Zen. It's not really part of Platonism, but I only bring this up because the 3rd picture is the first awakening experience. And yet there are 10 pictures. There's a great deal of work to do. And this has its parallel in the Republic, where Socrates says that he gives the great amount of work that you have to do, those preliminary working with the virtues, and then there are some practices to build understanding. And then he says all of this is just the prelude. And that brings us then to dialectic. And dialectic is an exercise that he recommends for those who are outside of the cave. And so that's like when you first step out of the cave, that's like the 3rd ox herding picture. You still have a long way to go. Your practice is really just beginning. Everything up to that was, he called it the prelude. It's everything that is just preparing you for the real practice, which is outside the cave, because there's still a great deal of learning and growth required, even outside the cave. I can tell you from my own experience that the further I go in this system, the more I appreciate how much work there is to do, even when you get outside the cave. And again, any part of this discussion here, if you have any further questions, please put that in the comment section below. Now, there was a question if producing written works is essential to Platonism. The short answer to that is no. My approach to Platonism is spiritual. For me, it's all about that discovery of self and understanding what that is and learning how to function in the world. And and so I'm not sure what perspective the person who asked this question was coming from. Perhaps it was an altruistic question of, do we have to create written works so that we're bringing other people in? And I'd say the general rule of thumb there is to get yourself, the wiser you become, the more you're able to help others. It's kind of like on an airplane, they tell you that in case of emergency, when the oxygen masks fall, they always say to put your own mask on before you put a mask on someone else. Kind of the same idea here. I often think of that imagery because the wiser you are, the more you're able to help someone else. Early on, we just have so many misunderstandings that even if we have the best of intentions, and even if we have that understanding of the dialogues that we may get from university, we don't really know the dialogues deeply enough to recognize all of the mistakes that we're making, all of the false assumptions that we're still carrying. And so I'd say, no, you don't need to write. If you feel compelled to write, then by all means you should. And we always want to listen to that intuitive voice. I don't know, again, about the person who asked this question. I'm not sure how far along this person was in their studies. But if the person is further along and feels like he or she has some insights they want to share, then go ahead and write, but it's not necessary. It's not like the academic idea of publish or perish. We don't follow that here. It's all about that discovery of self. If you feel compelled to write, then you should. If you don't, then don't. Just trust your intuition. It was my intuition that compelled me to quote from that book that I quoted from before. It was also my intuition that compelled me to start this YouTube channel, and each time that I have advanced the channel, added something to it, it was always an intuitive feeling that brought me to it. And I think we have to honor that intuition and just trust that it will take us where we need to go. I might just add, just as a side note here, that again, I'm not sure what perspective this person was coming from with the writing. I'm assuming maybe it was altruistic, but there's also the idea of, do you need to make a career out of it? I'm not going to assume that that's what the person was at, or the perspective that person was coming from, but it is a common idea. And so I'm just going to maybe just briefly talk about that there is one of the false beliefs that we have to overcome on this path is the idea that if we're not making money at something, then we're not being productive. And that is definitely going to be a block on your journey. If for anyone who might be holding that idea. And it's a very common one. Like my family doesn't even have any interest in talking about this YouTube channel. The only question I got from my mom is, are you making any money? And no, I'm not. So she lost interest at that point. Same with the book. I never made a cent off of it. But spiritual guides, by the way, are the worst people to ask about practical advice from. Sort of the stereotype image of the spiritual guide is you go to this person and ask, should I marry this person? And my friends all say I should break up with this person. He treats me terribly, but I'm so in love. Should I get married anyway? And the spiritual guide will always say, well, how do you feel? What do you think? And the idea there is that if you still feel compelled to marry this person despite all the red flags, then maybe it's a mistake you need to make. And so then you go back to the spiritual guide 2 years later and say, oh, it's so terrible. I was treated terribly. I was cheated on and treated like dirt. And this person spent all my money and we're getting divorced. And the spirit guide will say, oh, that's so wonderful. You learned something. because that's how spirit guides think. That's how spiritual guides think. Yeah, we're terrible to ask practical advice from. I don't know what your career should be and if you should make a career out of Platonism or not. But to me, making a career out of Platonism is separate from the practice of Platonism. And so that's either a side hustle or a career, either way you want to, either way you go with it. But it's something separate from the practice. You could be a professional Platonist who makes a living at it, but not be a genuine Platonist. And you can be a genuine Platonist who is not a professional, and it's possible to be both as well. So that's really up to you to decide. But all of the advice that I give is about being a spiritual Platonist. So whether you make money at it or not is up to you. And whether you write or not, whether you become a guide to others in that more altruistic approach to the question, aspect of the question, that's also depends on your feelings, your intuition. If you're doing it out of a sense of obligation or that you feel like it's what you're supposed to do, then there's probably some false belief there. But if your intuition in your clearest moments, if you have this inspiration to write something, then perhaps you should write it. There was also a question about how we can make sense of and accept all of the ignorance and pain in the world. This is my paraphrase of the question. I hope that I captured the essence of it. But this is an issue that I think we all deal with in some way or another. The urge for social activism can be strong. And again, if you feel that intuition, if your gut is telling you that this is your calling, this is your path to be an activist, then if it feels right to you, then you should do it. But don't feel guilty if you choose to spend your time reading and contemplating philosophy and doing the other theurgic practices that I discussed here. It doesn't mean that you're putting your head in the sand. I think there is a common image of philosophy that we are all just putting our heads in the sand, but it's not true. I think it's more accurate to say that the world needs philosophy. It desperately needs philosophy. What we'll find, there's a divine law that says that we cannot bring order to the outer world until we bring order to the inner world. The basic law is that as above, so below, as within, so without. Think how different the world would be if more people understood our interconnection. If more people understood that we are divine light, we're not these bodies. If more people knew how similar we are because we are divine light and the differences in our bodies or the languages we speak or the cultures that we're from or the religious practices of our local area, these things are not what define us. Imagine how different the world would be if more people knew that. If more people knew that the good is the first principle of all. If they knew that goodness is the fountain from which all of existence flows. And I'm not talking about goodness as a moral judgment, but goodness as the ultimate reality of all that truly is. And so this creates a paradox, though, when you see this, especially when you see it intellectually or conceptually, and it's not yet your experience. There's a real paradox there. How can a world that has goodness at its root be so filled with so much ugliness and so much pain and suffering? And so this is a real question that we have to battle with. What I can say is that the more the insights of this system become our everyday reality, our state of mind, the more we're going to see patterns in all of this. Philosophy helps us to understand really the craziness of our world, our politics, our societies, even our friends and family. We love them, but they're nuts. Why are they like that? But we can see the patterns. Now, some systems treat this world as a prison to escape, and there are even some dialogues in Plato's canon that, taken out of context, can seem that way as well. But overall, what we see is that we're here to learn. We're here to work through our limiting false images to break these patterns. Other systems might say that we're here to work out our karma. But we're going to find that everything that happens, no matter how awful it is, no matter how awful it seems from the human perspective, it's all part of our education. So on a personal level, we're overcoming our false beliefs. That's part of our lesson, and some of it is very painful. It absolutely is. On the macro level, we see the whole thing playing out as well, that humanity as a species has to learn how to live in peace. And some of the lessons are very painful ones. So from the human perspective, absolutely, there's a lot of pain and suffering in the world. Sometimes when I watch the news, when I see, well, I know this video is going to be on the internet for a long time, and the political channels, their videos have a very short shelf life, but on a philosophy channel like this, it can last for many years. So there'll be a very different political situation years from now. But there are wars going on at the time of this recording. There's children starving in Gaza at the time of this recording. We're seeing some really horrors in our own country and in America. I'm an American. There are some really horrible things happening in America to migrants and to people who were not born in America but have lived there for some years. And sometimes when I watch the news, I just tear up and I just cry because there's so much pain, and it's so hard to watch that suffering. And it's so hard to imagine from that human perspective that any of this could be providential or that there's an order, that any of it makes sense. But I can tell you that from another perspective, the more I see from that 30,000 feet view, so to speak, from that higher view, there is an order, and somehow it is providential that we are learning from all of this. I guess what I'm trying to say is that our aim is not to escape Earth, but it's to live here as awakened humans. We have to balance somehow that higher vision where you can say, oh, it's all providential, with that human vision. You don't want to lose the human. You can't lose the human. You just seem cold if you do. And you have to somehow balance the two, or find a way to see the way they fit together. It's not even a balance. A balance sounds like they're at odds with one another, but they actually fit together beautifully. And they're both true at the same time. And it can be very hard to see that until it becomes your reality. But that's where we're headed. That's what we need to see. And this means that seeing the suffering and feeling the pain of it, but also knowing how even this fits into the whole, is a big part of what we need to see. I'll end this video by saying that someone once told me that we're all philosophers, whether we know it or not. He was talking about people who complain about philosophers, and he told the person, you know what, we're all philosophers. Just some of us are really bad philosophers. And I think that's an idea that really helps clarify this last section of what I'm talking about here, of how to live in the world. We want to be a positive force in the world. And I think that was probably what was meant by the question of should we write? Do we have to write? From the altruistic perspective, it's the idea that we want to be a positive force. The social activism idea, we want to be a positive force in the world. Even if you choose to only interact with the people in your immediate world, you still want to be a positive force among your friends, among your family, and so on. And I think that what we'll find is that there's a desperate need for philosophy because it helps us be that positive force. Whether we're on the world stage interacting with a great number of people or just among our own friends and family, the wiser we are, the more we're going to inspire others. We don't help others by lecturing them. We are the example that they see, the light that helps guide them, that wake them up, that helps them. The brighter your light shines, the more other people can see as well, because you light up the room, so to speak. And so we want to be good philosophers. We're all philosophers, right? But we want to be good philosophers. So I'll end the video on that note. I encourage you all to be good philosophers. And if you have any questions about, to further clarify how to be a good philosopher, how to practice Platonism, please feel free to put those below, and also any comments you have and any techniques that you use that you think would add to the conversation and enrich our lives even more. Please put those below. We'd love to see your ideas. So thank you very much. I hope you found this helpful, and hope you'll join me next time. Salang.